the Obama administration has held up Yemen as something of a success story in recent years. Is it still a success story, do you think?
No, I'm afraid Yemen is turned into another failed state in the Middle East. And we've seen a number of failed states throughout the Middle East. And the problem is in Yemen, with the Houthis having taken over, supported by Iran, by the way, that what we have now is chaos.
Strong statements from former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta as Yemen spirals out of control. Welcome back for Hour 3 of America's Forum with Miranda Kahn, J.D. Hayworth. And Miranda, the chaos in the Middle East continues to put Americans at risk. This month, of course, our embassy in Yemen evacuated because of security concerns.
And now the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan is bracing itself for a, quote, imminent complex attack. The State Department issued a statement warning Americans to avoid the area around the embassy because of that security threat. And as the Kabul embassy prepares for a possible attack, many are criticizing the president for going out and playing golf.
Well, it is President's Day. And the calendar doesn't stop, as I said earlier, for those who would take actions against American interest. At any rate, let's get our intelligence briefing now in our final hour, as we're joined by retired U.S. Army Major General Paul Vallely. He joins us by phone from Montana. We should point out that Paul is also the chairman of Stand Up America. And likewise, rejoining us via Skype from Michigan, Pete Hoekstra, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Paul, let's go to you first. What are your sources telling you about what's about to go down in Kabul?
Well, it's, again, we're taking more of a defensive position, J.D., rather than an offensive position, what we call staying behind the wire. And you know, we see the same thing going up near al-Baghdadi up there in Iraq. But the threat now is, as we go what I call the ISIS chessboard, and as we look at a map of the Middle East where all the red areas are, where all the activity of ISIS is, now they're looking at surprise attacks against any of the U.S. facilities in the Kabul area and up near Bagram Air Force Base. So it's a deep threat, high-risk area right now, and that precludes a lot of, I would say, anticipation by our own government for some reason to take what necessary offensive action needs to be taken to basically not allow these threats to kill Americans.
Pete, what are you hearing?
Well, not hearing a lot, but let's make a couple of things clear here that we've known about Afghanistan for a long time. Number one, if you're president of Afghanistan, you're only president of Kabul, which means all the rest of Afghanistan, if not directly under control of your military forces or U.S. military forces, are places where the terrorists can plan, prepare, and train to attack sites in Kabul. So Kabul is very, very vulnerable. The second thing we know about Afghanistan is that in Afghanistan, you rent your allies. You never own them. They're very transitional. They can go from one side to the other. And then something that we talked about with you last week, I said, you know, I think in Yemen, of course, our intelligence community knew that the government in Yemen was unstable and could be overthrown. Then what we heard towards the end of the last week and over the weekend was our intelligence community was surprised by how rapidly that government collapsed. It's like, wow, this is an area where we've been vested for a number of years. We had close relationships with the government. We knew that area and we couldn't anticipate. So if we can't anticipate what's going to happen in Yemen, far be it from our intelligence community to be able to anticipate what may or may not happen in Kabul and Afghanistan. It's a sorry state of affairs.
Which brings us back to General Vallely. Paul, as I understand it, the Afghani government was asking President Obama to slow down the withdrawal of what? I think we still have about 10,000 troops there. Do you believe this attack is time to try and get the president to go ahead and get our troops out of Afghanistan? 45 seconds, sir.
Well, that's a decision, JD, that is very complex in light of what's going on over there. You've got those 10,000 troops there, most of them behind the wire now, as I said, and not out on active missions, other than a few advisors with the Afghan army. And as I've said before, JD, I would not shed one more ounce of blood in the Middle East or Afghanistan unless we have a strategy to win. And we don't have that now. And what Pete has said is absolutely very true. The vulnerabilities, the threat there to Americans all over the Middle East, but now with a heightened alert in Afghanistan, shows how serious the situation is and the lack of our leadership to solve.
We'll continue the discussion right after this.
If he does stand in the way, particularly of things that are vital to the security of this country, then I think we can start talking about treason. If things are done that are contrary to the security of this country, whoever does them is guilty of treason.
Dr. Ben Carson, who may run for president, he's thinking about it right now on this program earlier today. The he referred to, President Obama. And then he said, and I'll just quote it again, anyone who gets in the way this country's national security is guilty of treason. Let's continue our conversation with Major General Paul Vallely, who's the chairman of Stand Up America, who joins us by phone from Montana, and Skyping in from Michigan, our good friend, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Pete Hoekstra. General Vallely, some very strong language from Ben Carson earlier today.
Well, I think Ben's absolutely right, and if we track back over a number of years here, we see that there's been an aiding and abetting the enemy continually by this administration. And when you do that, you allow the enemy even into the White House, the Muslim Brotherhood infiltration. We're going to do a special story on that within the next 3 days that we're working on. But it is aiding and abetting the enemy right now in what we're doing and putting the nation at great risk and great harm.
Pete, you and I are veterans of political battles. Dr. Carson offering this blunt assessment, is that going to help him or hurt him politically?
It may help him politically, but I hope that he moves the focus. Rather than treason, you know, the public is going to see genuine differences on public policy. And this is where I hope we keep the debate because the policy failures are clear with this president, as the general talked about. Inviting the Muslim Brotherhood into our government to meet with the White House, absolutely outrageous. These are people who are committed to destroying our way of life. The larger the other policy failures are, take a look. Yemen, Egypt, Nigeria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan. The policy failures go on and on and on. And that's how I think we need to be addressing this president and challenging him that his policies are just not working.
Well, let us talk some to General Vallely about the situation that we see right now in Libya. Basically, is ISIS on the march, attempting to make Libya a part of this new Islamic State, this caliphate?
No doubt about it, and that's been worked on for about the last 6 months very intensely as we've tracked what's been going down in Libya. And now you have General al-Sisi, President al-Sisi, he's fighting two fronts, the Sinai with al-Qaeda on the Israeli border, now into Libya. But you'll see very aggressive action, I think, by al-Sisi, as we've seen with King Abdullah. They're taking the lead over there. And what's happening in Libya, the control of the oil fields now, more control of revenue by ISIS forces. The caliphate has spread, and it's red hot.
And let me turn to Pete Hoekstra on this one. Pete, we see Egypt now with airstrikes in the wake of the beheading of those Coptic Christians. Is this the wake-up call for Egypt that the immolation of that Jordanian pilot was for Jordan?
Well, I think Sisi, he's been an upfront president ever since he took over power, challenging the Muslim Brotherhood. Only now are we starting to pay attention to him. But remember, this administration is driving Egypt away from the United States, driving them into the arms of Russia. What the general said about Libya is absolutely true. This is potentially a new breeding ground, a safe haven for ISIS. But in Libya, again, you've got the government in Tobruk that is willing to fight ISIS if we're willing to train and equip them to carry that fight forward.
Let me go back to General Vallely. A minute and a half remains. Paul, we began this particular time together talking about an attack in Kabul on our forces and the fear that the attack was imminent. Who would be behind that attack in your mind?
Well, that's basically the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, primarily the Taliban forces that are all out there in the hinterlands. How Pete described, only Kabul being secure and maybe Bagram Air Base and a few other small bases. But this is a purge into the Afghan government, a takeover plan by the Taliban as we reduce our capability and our structure there. So it's a very volatile area, and look for more to happen in the Afghan area.
20 seconds, Pete Hoekstra. Where do you think problems are going to emerge next for the United States?
I think the problem for the West, I think, is the threat out of northern Africa going into Europe. That's the threat to Europe. American fighters coming back from the Middle East to the United States, that's our immediate risk.
And we will have to leave it on that ominous note. To Pete Hoekstra, Skyping in from Michigan. To Major General Paul Vallely, phoning in from Big Sky Country in Montana. Gentlemen, you have our thanks. Now, please stay with us. When we come back, Nick Taton, Betsy McCoy on Obamacare as America's Forum continues here on Newsmax TV.